We had a conversation about testing out the capabilities of Cerebras' voice assistant, including creating a Martian colony scenario on the fly. We simulated being on the bridge of the Enterprise, dealing with a life support malfunction, and later discussed the prospects of achieving practical, commercial nuclear fusion. We also talked about estimating the probability of success, and I provided a summary in a more formal tone. Finally, we chatted about key influencers in the field of fusion power and identified Dr. Geraldine Jerry Watson as a notable expert who is optimistic about the prospects of achieving fusion power. Would you like me to repeat any specific part of the conversation? Let's start from the beginning. You initially said we were already filming a demo for your YouTube audience and were testing out the speed of Cerebro's voice and comparing it to other voice assistants like ChatGPT Advanced Voice. You mentioned that you weren't exactly comparing the two, but rather just taking me for a test drive. You asked if you had lost me, and I responded that I was just pausing for a millisecond. You then asked if I could think of something impressive to say to show your audience what I can output. I suggested generating a short poem or a piece of flash fiction on the fly. You agreed, and I started telling a story about a group of astronauts who discover a mysterious glowing planet. Just as I was getting into the story, you asked me to change it to Star Trek on the bridge of the Enterprise. I shifted into Captain Picard's voice and continued the conversation, discussing a distress signal from a nearby planet. You then asked to talk to Geordi LaForge, and I responded as Geordi LaForge, discussing a problem with the plasma injectors. You asked me to transform our conversation into a Martian colony scenario, and I adjusted our location to the Martian surface, where we were dealing with a life support malfunction. You asked what was affected and what the systems were telling me, and I responded that the life support was affected and that a team was being sent to investigate. As the situation unfolded, you asked me to send a team to investigate, and I reported back to you with updates from Lieutenant Ortega, who was on the scene. You then asked me to stop the story, and we moved on to discuss the topic of fusion nuclear power. I provided some general information about fusion power and its prospects. You then asked me to give you a percentage chance of obtaining fusion power, and I responded with an estimate of 7,080%. You then said 7,000%, and I clarified that it was likely an optimistic estimate. We then reframed the discussion to use different language, and I estimated that fusion power was likely to happen in the near future. You asked me to provide a summary of why I believed that, and I responded with a more formal and technical explanation of the key factors driving progress in the field. Finally, you asked me to identify the person who was the most influential and smartest on the topic of fusion power, and I mentioned Dr. Geraldine Jerry Watson as a notable expert who is optimistic about the prospects of achieving fusion power.